We have today three great panelists. We have Commissioner Mike Morath, who heads the Texas Education Agency and is responsible for implementing education policy for more than 5 million students in Texas. We have State Representative Diego Bernal, who's a Democrat out of San Antonio and a member of the House Education Committee, and also School Finance Commission. And then we have Representative Dan Huberty, a Republican from Houston, who's the head of the House Public Education Committee and a member of the School Finance Commission. So again, school finance is obviously, and education generally is obviously the main topic going forward. You have Governor Abbott weighing in on school finance early on before the session, which hasn't happened in past sessions. You have the Lieutenant Governor and the likely House Speaker, Dennis Bonnen, also saying that school finance is going to be a major topic this session. But I think, where I wanted to start this conversation is the TEA and the Legislative Budget Board, which is responsible for providing some of this budget information for lawmakers, have really different numbers when it comes to how much the state has spent on public education and what the state share is versus the local share of public education. So I wanted to ask, if I think everyone on this stage is committed to school finance, is committed to improving student outcomes, but how do you do that if you're not starting on the same page with those numbers?
Well, so I can try to address that. So from my perspective, the LBB and TEA do have exactly the same numbers in terms of public education spending. The question is how the numbers have been sliced for what arena. So, for example, most of the LBB publications are projections on a go-forward basis because they're providing budgetary advice to the legislature as they adopt a budget. And most of the sort of baseline numbers that you see are based solely on the foundation school program component. So when you think about the difference between looking at budgeted versus actual, and then you think about the difference of all-in spending versus just the foundation school program. So for example, TEA's budget is education spending in the state of Texas, but that's not part of the foundation school program. So as long as we're using the same underlying methodology, we always have the same numbers. It's just a question of which particular slice of funding information you're interested in. So, and that's relevant to the school finance conversation. So the legislature has historically authorized a number of riders for certain initiatives, which tend to be outside of the foundation school program. That's still spending and universally state spending. But if you're a school district itself, the funding that you receive is driven predominantly by the foundation school program. So that's going to be of high level of interest. There's also the question of whether or not you count federal spending as you do those projections. And so the LBB generally ignores the federal money that goes to school districts because it goes, there's processes sort of unrelated to legislative action that drive federal spending in school districts. And so you can typically only get that information with a high degree of accuracy if you're looking at actual spending as opposed to budget.
But Representative Bernal, I think, during the School Finance Commission, this was something that you talked about a lot, and I think you were frustrated with not being able to pin down the actual numbers. I think it's, in terms of practicality and logistics, if you're not starting with the same numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my primary question is, why do we care? Why do we care what the split is? I think we care because I think some people care because to them it's a barometer about how mad other people should be. So if the state share is small, they're worried that that's going to cause some sort of uprising of the people of Texas saying, look at how small the state share is. If they can argue or articulate that the state share is more even, then that's sort of saying you shouldn't be as angry. I don't know why we don't measure it the way that we've measured it for decades, especially when it comes to school finance litigation. This is the first time we've measured it this way, whereas in the past we've measured it the same way over and over again. I don't know how much it matters. I think what we should, for the most part, be focused on is the way that these things are experienced by the students and educators in the schools. They don't care what the split is. They just know that things haven't changed in a very long time and they have to get better. I don't know if we were to go from 36 to 45, if the dollar amount they receive is the same, I'm not sure how much it matters to them. So to some degree, I mean, I think there is a moral obligation for the state to do more, but to some degree, I think it's also a political question. And I understand it, but I'm much more interested in the way that educators and students experience being in our public schools. And if they're saying to us over and over again in droves that things need to get better and that they don't have the resources they need, that's more important to me than where the split is.
Representative Huberty, do you think that the numbers are important?
Look, the reality of it is the way we start our process within the legislature is we start with LBB numbers. That's where our data comes from. So those are the numbers we're going to start with. What Commissioner Morath and they do relative to spending is a reporting mechanism versus the actual numbers that we're going to use. So that's the baseline that we start with. And LBB's numbers are basically saying when we talk about GR, general revenue, when we're there, if we do nothing, state spending will go down to about between 32 to 33%, leaving current formulas in place right now. 2007, we were spending about 50%. Clearly, it's a problem. We recognize the problem. We tried to fix it last session. We did not. We had the School Finance Commission. So there's lots of ideas that we're going to come up with. So yeah, the numbers are going to be important, but it's a starting point. It's a starting point relative to that. But I remind everybody about this other situation, which is the states, when we say the state share, the state needs to pay. We're all taxpayers. We pay taxes in a couple different ways. And you know, I listened to an economist talk about this morning, actually. The interesting thing about it is that, you know, while we're a business-friendly state, we really do have kind of a messed up property tax system, you know, relative to where we're at as the rest of the states goes. We're one of the highest taxing states relative to property taxes and about 12th for sales tax. But those are the levers that we get to pull. And so ultimately, you know, when we think about whether it's state money or property tax money, it's all public dollars that are going in to pay for those things. It's just the reallocation of how do we do that and how are we going to get there. So again, starting point LBB numbers, that's where we're going to start this legislative session with what we're spending, and we're going to build from there.
Do you expect, when the School Finance Commission comes out with its report at the end of December, I think is when you have to do that, do you expect there to be a number attached to it?
You know, we're having a meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I have not, I'm not a part of the revenue working group. I've had 1 or 2 meetings is my understanding. They had one this week, made some recommendations. I've seen them. I'd like to understand them a little bit better before I truly comment. And what I mean by understanding them better is that I recognize that some of the things that are in there are some of the things the governor's talked about, but I want to dig in and really understand what does that mean? Meaning if we're going to go to the cap or the 2.5% cap to spend for that, then where's the backup? How are we gonna pay for the rest of that? And I just need to understand it. So I think it'd be irresponsible to sit there and criticize or comment on something that I want to have explained to me, which will be explained tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And so I think it's going to be important for us to be able to do that. What I can tell you though is that the while I was a opponent of the original School Finance Commission. In fact, I carried the bill in the House and I killed it because I didn't think that we needed to continue to study school finance. I have been pleasantly surprised about the work that, you know, Mr. Morath's team has done to help us and guide us, and the work that all of us have done that I think has been productive. We spent a lot of time during the interim talking about these things. We've got really good outcomes. Todd Williams, an amazing guy who came up with some great stuff in their outcomes groups, and then the work that the Expenditures Committee worked on that I led, collaboratively with Senator Taylor and Royce West and talking about, and Scott Brister. I think we have a really good foundation. Now, what that becomes when it goes into the session, I don't know, but it gave us ideas of what we should be working on. So I'm ultimately, I was going in as a negative thinking person and came out of it at the end saying, we actually did some pretty good work on that, and I'm pleased with it.
Do you plan to be leading the committee that's going to be moving it forward in the House?
I serve at the pleasure of the Speaker.
Okay. I'd also love to ask our representatives, now with the post-elections. The Senate looks different, and the House as well looks different than it did last session. Last session, when the House pushed school finance reform in terms of, removing some of the outdated formulas and putting more money into school finance, I think the Senate was focused on, ESAs, was focused on subsidies for private school tuition. It doesn't seem like it will be the same construction this session. How do you expect the move in the House to push for school finance reform to be different this session?
I think that House members, because of the nature of their district, are closer to their districts. There's by nature, you're closer to people. And so we recognize that school finance is a priority because that's a priority for the people of the state. And I think that the election that happened showed people saying, focus on the things that matter and stop focusing on things that you think matter that the rest of us don't. So I think the Senate, I hope the Senate, I can't always distinguish between what I hope and what I believe, but I think the Senate got the same message that the House did, which is focus on things that matter. And I'd like to believe they'll be more receptive to a strident school finance plan than they were last session.
I thought you were going to go to Mike. But I think that, look, our focus when we started last legislative session, again, I don't like looking in the rearview mirror very much, but it's important to understand the context of what we're thinking about. And I think Diego and myself have been working on legislation all through the interim, gathering ideas and concepts, with the intention that we're going to be involved in some way. We hope both to be involved and continue to work very hard on this, because we literally, we didn't have an interim. I mean, there was no interim for us. I mean, I've had over 50 meetings up here in Austin, so people think this is a part-time gig. They're completely wrong on that. But what I think is important is that the concepts that I've heard from some of the members who have said we have to have, certain things within the education system, whatever that may be, are changing their tune to the degree that now they're saying number one priority is school finance reform. And Speaker Bonin, Speaker-elect Bonin, has said that is his most important issue for us to address. And what he means is public school finance. He's talking about public school finance. He wants that fixed. We've been kicking the can down the road for many, many, many years, and it's time, and it's about time to be able to do that. So we have an excellent working relationship with members of the Senate Education Committee, including Chairman Taylor. He was very engaged during this commission process. I feel like he's going to be engaged in this process. We're collaborating, our offices are talking, and we're working on different ideas and concepts as we go forward. So I feel good about that. Just the general nature of the fact that we're down to 83 Republicans versus the 67 Democrats has changed the dynamics of the House. And as a result of that, you have to understand just kind of the way it was last legislative session. I did go to Cleveland State, but I did learn how to count. So, and so that's the most important thing. And that's how you have to govern as you go forward. You have to be able to get done what you can get done. And that's our focus right now. And number one priority for us and for the Speaker and I think for the citizens of the state of Texas is school finance reform, for sure.
Commissioner, you've talked a lot. I have heard you talk a lot about teachers, and reforming school finance means improving conditions for teachers, making teachers want to actually stay in schools, making teaching a position that's attractive to people instead of one that is sort of more looked down on than I think you compared Finland and the U.S. in a presentation I saw recently, and how people view teachers in both countries being really different. And I think that that's something that seems to be, politically palatable to people of having, a program like potentially what Dallas ISD is doing, of having, teachers who are considered to be higher quality teachers and giving them more money to work in schools that are lower performing. But I also think that, obviously in Dallas recently they had to, ask for a tax hike to actually fund some of that. I'm curious what you're hearing from educators in school districts about, what they want from the legislature, what they need in order to be able to do better for teachers in the state.
So my view of public education is centered around the classroom. We know without question that the single most important in-school factor affecting the outcomes of our students is the teacher in the classroom. Now, there's a lot of stuff outside of school, but inside the school, it's the teacher in the classroom. And there are a variety of challenges in the teaching profession. I mean, it is a very difficult profession. It requires a degree of cognitive skill on order with brain surgery, because that's actually what our teachers do. They operate on 20 brains simultaneously instead of one, and none of the patients are asleep. They're very much awake. The question is how do we make the profession as supportive for the professionals as possible, as rewarding as possible, and align the incentives of our system in terms of how we support them professionally with training and whatnot, and the time that we give them, as well as how we compensate them. And my view on this for a long time has been that our current approach to compensation sends people all the wrong signals. It basically tells teachers, and really anybody who's paying attention, that if you would like to get ahead professionally in public education, get as far away from students as humanly possible, because that is the way that you get raises if you work in our public education system. There's a variety of things that make people satisfied in life in terms of a career, and money is only one of them. And I don't think any teacher that you talk to today, it's not that money is a primary motivator, but you have to make enough money that you can take care of your family and sort of take money off the table as a concern. And even the most altruistic amongst us are still gonna, I gotta save for college for my kids and that sort of thing. So the question of can the two conversations be linked? Can the conversation about the way the system of finance works from a legislative perspective provide support for school districts so that they can create career pathways for teachers that reward their excellence and their devotion to the craft while staying in the classroom, as opposed to compensation systems in school districts that encourage them to get away from the classroom. So I've been extremely excited to listen to the Finance Commission's deliberations on this topic. It's something, of course, I'm passionate about, and Dallas has had some track record with. Can it be done with the current allotment of funds that school districts have? With a lot of extraordinarily difficult conditions, maybe.
The answer is no.
But I think the short version of that is, on a long-term basis, I don't think it can be done unless there is a sort of dedicated source of funds that support teacher quality growth on a long-term basis.
And you were doing so great until you just got to the end, right? Yeah. So. I want to add something. It was interesting. I spoke at a panel this morning, and I brought this up. And Commissioner and I, this was a bill the governor wanted at the end of last session, and we were trying to cobble something together. And I told the commissioner, I said, I just don't think it's. I think anytime you make a rash and rushed decision, at least from my perspective, when I've ever done that, it's always the worst decisions that I usually make, right? And so we held off on that and said, let's talk about it and go forward. But I brought it up today. Here's where I think the other issue is going to be on this particular thing. While I think the teachers are supportive of it, and I'm not talking about teacher groups, I'm talking about teachers, okay? Let's be very clear on that. Surprisingly, it's also, I've gotten some pushback on this from superintendents and principals. And it's because it creates a competitive environment and a more difficult process to be able for them to manage. And so they say, well, back in the 80s when we did this, we did it and then we pulled the rug out, and so we have to start over again. So they're more interested in basically saying, well, we'd rather just have $1,000 for everybody and just give it to everybody, and then everybody's happy because they all got the same thing. Well, that doesn't create the incentive for the teacher that we want to go to Humble Elementary School versus Deerwood. Same school district. The difference is 95% economically disadvantaged versus 95% Anglo, right? Now, where do you think that senior teacher is going to want to teach? Some may want to go to the elementary school, but they're not. So we've got to create that. And so we have to get buy-in. And I was standing around 4 superintendents, and they were all like kind of shaking their head. And I was just like, guys, this is going to happen. You all need to get on board, and you need to help us create this program because we're going to do this. And so I think that's the other, that has been one of the biggest obstacles, I think, in many of the issues that we deal with relative to school finance and all these other things. And it's not just the schools, everybody else, but and I'm not criticizing them, but there is some bureaucracy certainly within the superintendent's chairs. And they want us to make their lives easier, and we want to challenge them to be more creative on that. So that's my view.
And I just wanted to make sure I distinguish these. These are actually 2 issues we're talking about. One is creating a way of evaluating and ranking teachers at large so that more successful and defining success is difficult, teachers get more money. And then there's this other issue, which is how do we get the teachers best suited for challenging schools into those schools? So we've got this generational problem of schools that are failing and underperforming almost every time they're surrounded by generational poverty. And the idea is, how do you incentivize successful teachers, defining success very carefully, to go and teach in those schools? And I actually pose the question the other way, and it's, how have we allowed the students in the schools with the most need to continue to get the least experienced teachers and the fewest resources, right? So, and I went to these schools. So I want to just distinguish between the teacher conversation at large and making sure that we get the best teachers, defining best very carefully, and resources to the schools that need it the most. There's actually 2 things that have a link in the center.
And I know Mike's going to respond too, and I think that when he was on the board there, they started that process and creating that and where it is. And I don't disagree with you, Diego. I think it's critical that we do that. And the point is that we have pushed back on these evaluation systems over the years because we always have this top-down driven view, right? And I think that's why it has failed. Is that we at the state create this, give rulemaking authority over to the commissioner who's ever sitting in that chair, and then they shove it down everybody's throat. Well, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a bottom-up driven type process where there's improvement, because I think competition breeds success, and people inherently want to compete and do a better job, and we want to incentivize them to do that. So that's what I think we should be focusing on, Mike.
No, I mean, I think all the points that they made are deeply insightful and spot on. I get back to the point that Representative Bernal mentioned about getting the sort of most effective teachers in the environments where the students need them the most, and this brings us back to this school finance conversation. I think compellingly clear, because if you look at the amount of money that is spent at some of our highest need schools, it is actually noticeably higher. It's not, hugely higher, but it is higher than the amount of money that is spent at the lowest need schools. It's not a huge amount of difference. But the thing is that dollar bills do not educate children. Teachers educate children. And if all teachers are basically paid the same, then we haven't actually connected this sort of school finance system to fix this basic problem of equity, of giving our neediest students the most effective performers. And that's one of the reasons why this is such a compelling need for us statewide. I mean, something close to 60% of the students in the state of Texas today are eligible for a free reduced price lunch. We're going to need to increase our support of the profession at large, while also where appropriate and where effective, sort of targeting the resources that matter most. But the resource ultimately is actually the adult in the classroom with the students, and that's why these conversations all need to be inextricably linked, because that's the only way we actually solve this problem.
Right. In Dallas, which I think is the example we're all talking about, in Dallas, they are spending significantly more per child, but they're spending it on teachers.
But they're spending on the teachers that they've identified.
They're also spending it on social workers, and they're spending it on keeping class sizes small. It's all together, right? I mean, I know the teachers are the centerpiece to it. But I think what we're realizing is that if you deploy the money intelligently, if you spend it strategically, surgically, then you get the best result. I agree. You can't just throw money at the problem. Not that we've ever tried that, by the way. It's not like we ever overfunded education and said, "Oh, that didn't work. Well, we'll go back." Like, we've never done that. But if we do spend money in a very strategic, surgical way on the things that matter, you get the results. Let me just say this about Dallas. The thing about Dallas that means the most to me, and I went to visit these schools. The thing about Dallas that means the most to me is that they were able to turn those schools around, have them competing at the same level as the wealthiest part of the city, and they didn't change one kid. They didn't import other kids. They didn't try to find some fancy way of integrating students in a variety of levels. It absolutely proves that talent is distributed evenly, but opportunity and resources are not. And once you correct that, those kids can compete with anybody. That is what we need to replicate across the state. And I'm really encouraged that both of these guys on either side of me are on board with that.
So you think it's not just money, but it's also some sort of state incentive to do it well?
It's how you spend the money. It's both. You can spend money in a way where you don't get as much of a return as if you spend it in a way where you know it's going to work and it's going to matter.
I mean, for example, one of the recommendations that the outcome groups came up with is that, this is just a novel idea, that every third grader ought to be able to read. Wow, that's insightful, right? Well, guess what? Less than 50% can. And so we sit there and say, well, how do we fix that? Well, it's early childhood development, it's early childhood education, it's funding pre-K properly, things that we've been working on, and that Diego and myself have been at the forefront of the legislative session in trying to get those things done. But coming up and say, well, what does that really cost? What's putting a number to it? What's it going to cost? Meaning, getting the best professional educators in the classroom. One of the things, and again, this is not a criticism of elementary education, but what happens is that we sit there and say, we get elementary teachers that go into those classrooms, and that's where they want to go, and they're like, oh, geez, I just don't want to go teach, high school. And the same with the high schoolers. So, I'm a high school teacher. I'm not an elementary teacher. Versus really saying from your talent pool, who is the best teacher that should be in that classroom? And start making decisions along those lines and incentivizing them to say, look, we'd love you to give up your business, marketing teaching, but can you go and, maybe teach third grade or fourth grade or something like that and incentivize them to be able to do that. So that's going to be the focus of, when we think about little things like that, of saying, how do we incentivize, create the programs, and then really get to our plan, which is 60 by 30. We have 12 years to get there. Where are we at now, percentage-wise, on that graduate?
25.
25%. 25%.
Depends on how you measure it, but
yeah,
in terms of
well, if it's LBB's number, it's a little higher probably. So
I saw that joke coming.
But okay, so 25%, we have to be at 60%, right? And we have 12 years to get there. So if we start now with these children that are starting in first grade or kindergarten as we go forward, we have a real opportunity to be successful and to hit that target, right? But we have to put the resources where they belong, and it's at that level. That's the most spongy the brain is for those kids at that time to be able to grasp that information. And I understand that we have, the dual language learners and the ELLs and all the other issues, the things that come with that. But we also made those recommendations too that said, geez, we should continue to fund that and put more money in those programs as well, right? And really put the money where it belongs. So those are just some concepts.
I wanted to pivot to a different topic that I think still belongs under the umbrella of school finance. I think recently there was a Fifth Circuit opinion that came out that basically said that the way that Texas spent money on special education in 2012, which was basically to reduce funding that year versus the previous year, was a violation of federal law. They upheld the Department of Education's decision on that. And the opinion also was pretty harsh, I think, about the actual funding model for special education. It said that it created a perverse incentive for a state to escape its financial obligations. What role is that playing in, as you move forward with discussing school finance and also special education, Commissioner?
It is certainly a worthy attention in the context of school finance. I have not met someone who participates in an ARD committee hearing, so the determination as to whether a student needs services. I've not met a person in one of those settings that is influenced by the school finance system. But I have met a bunch of CFOs of districts who are concerned about the amount of money that they spend supporting students in special education and whether or not the amount of money that they receive in the formulas is sufficient for that purpose. So it's certainly worthy of legislative attention. But also part of the part of the sort of historical legacy, and what we are working strategically to try to remedy, is the support for our schools to improve the quality both of identification and supports offered to students in special education. So for over about a 10 or 15 year period, the percentage of students who are identified as being eligible for special education supports in Texas declined noticeably. That bottomed out a few years ago, and it's starting to come back up. But we've got a lot of work to do to support our professionals out in the field to improve the quality support that we offer to our kids. And I will just say none of this is easy. There's not any sort of silver bullet to it. It takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication. We have a strategic plan, a 5-year strategic plan related to the kinds of supports that we want to expand for students in special education. But I think it is also a worthy topic in the School Finance Commission context.
But I want to point out that it wasn't just enrollment, that it was actually the way that money was being allocated for students and the weighted student funding model that is set up that made it so that funding decreased. And potentially, I think there were examples raised of other funding decreases beyond what the Fifth Circuit had ruled on.
Look, it's something that we have to fix. And I want to say, I know examples of educators because I spend a lot of my time visiting schools and talking to teachers. I know dozens of examples where schools hit and districts hit their 8.5% cap, and then they started to send kids who would otherwise be special ed to 504 and other placements. We've done a criminal injustice to these kids. We do need a very straight pathway to fix it, and we can't continue to have school finance conversations as if that's going to fix itself on its own on the side, as if the legal process is going to fix it for us. And so as we start talking about revenue sources, how sustainable they are, where they're going to come from, I think we have to take into consideration the amount of money it's going to take, not only just to rectify this issue and get us on the right path, but to keep us there. What that looks like, I don't think we're there yet.
Texas is unique. We have, where some states qualify all their children as, special needs or special education children, depending on their qualifications, right? They could be a 504 child, have dyslexia or something along those lines, and they count them all. We've kind of had this bifurcation when you say 504, but because I have one. I understand. I have a son. I've been through ARD meetings since he's in first grade. He's now a junior in high school. I get it. And even with the positions that I've held the whole time that he's been there, whether it's school board or this, we have to continue to fight. And so if it's hard for me, it's certainly hard for the regular parents that are out there. And so I agree with Representative Bernal is that that we have let these children down. And the feds were right, relative to the amount of money. And it was, part of it was meeting our maintenance of effort, and we weren't doing it. I mean, we knew it. We knew where the numbers were at that time. Clearly different administration than we have with the commissioner that's sitting here today, and I know they've been working very hard to fix that. You can't turn the ship overnight. He's doing as much as we can. We passed the bills last session to basically say there cannot be a cap. I believe that we're going to see the numbers somewhere close to 11% when it gets all said and done, somewhere around there, and the number will settle. And school districts have a responsibility, but it's also incumbent upon the school districts to make sure that they're identifying properly and they're doing those things. And it's very hard when you think about when you have a special needs child and what they have, if they could be dyslexic and they could be dysgraphic, two very connected, but two different issues. And you have to have a specialist that can teach that. So what we're expecting our school districts to do is to be experts in every single one of these fields, and it's very, very difficult. And here's the other problem. When you think about this, more than 50% of all the teachers that are getting certified in the state of Texas are being alt certified. It's almost 60% now, alt certified, which means 40% are coming from a 4-year degree in university. So when we think about the amount of teachers that are being hired, those 40% that are left, how many of them do you think are actually focused on special education? We have a tremendous shortage of special education teachers here, which is another reason we need to create the incentive programs to get people to be able to specialize in that to help these children. Because I can't lay the blame 100% at the feet of the school districts or the teachers that are trying, because I promise you, I've had those teachers that have said, look, tell me what I'm supposed to do to help your son, because I just don't know. And we can't blame them for that, but they're trying. But that's the perception everybody has, right? We raise, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I'm going to do this because it's important. As a school board member, I saw this happen. What has happened in society today with parents is that they kick the kid out the door at 8 o'clock in the morning and expect the school district to raise them with no input in the process. Now, that's probably more than 50% of what we see that's happening out there is happening today. And on the special needs side, it's even more prevalent because a lot of times the parents don't understand how they can help as well. And so one of the things that we have to do as we get into this legislative session is how do we create more incentives, more things for special education? We did some really cool things last session relative to dyslexia and autism. We need to do more. We need to come up with more programs and more opportunities and create those partnerships and create those opportunities for those kids because it's our responsibility to make sure that they don't get left behind.
I've heard, from some teachers who are saying that a year after, the feds came back and said that, you need to reform the way that you do special education in Texas, that nothing feels different in their school districts, that, things feel like business as usual. The problems that they reported to the feds are still there. I'd love to know what, each of you thinks the other should be doing in order to make sure, it's both of your responsibilities or all of your responsibilities to make sure that this changes for them. What should TA be doing? What should lawmakers be doing?
Let me start with what I know we should be doing, and it really dovetails with what Chairman Huberty mentioned just a moment ago. You think about you have a classroom teacher in some school district in Texas, and Maybank ISD that is an absolute expert on dyslexia, and has had a number of students come through with dyslexia and has supported those students as effectively as a student with dyslexia can possibly be supported. And then the next year, a student that's on the severe end of the autism spectrum shows up for the first time in that teacher's career. This is the central challenge, is how do we build the training apparatus, the professional support apparatus, to support 350,000 teachers in Texas, plus the more than 35,000 new teachers that come in every year, so that they have the requisite base in a breadth of differentiation techniques to provide each of our students with what they're sort of morally deserving. That is a central logistical challenge, and I think that's where we at TEA have got to get very serious about how we sort of drive the professional support apparatus for our teachers. And so part of that is the teacher certification process that we do in conjunction with the State Board of Educator Certification, and how the certification requirements then drive pre-service training. But part of that is also how we support school districts in their continuous professional development of teachers in a whole host of areas. So one of the things that we have on our agenda is the rollout of essentially special education PD academies, similar to the sort of governor's reading academies. And incidentally, when you speak about dyslexia, it's like the nexus of the two. And so this is something that we are moving at pace to launch, but the first version of those won't come until next summer. If things take some time, especially if you're trying to build something to work at the scale of Texas. The other challenges that we have are in the area of identification, and whether we have the sufficient diagnostic capacity and sufficient clarity for the field and how to support identification. And so that's also stuff that, again, we've got to get far more serious about than we have in the past. I have stood up an entire division, operating division in the agency, which is the first time we've had one for, 10, 15 years, to support special education. So 55 new people have been hired for this work, and that's, sounds like a lot, but it's 55 people to support 350,000 teachers. So the amount of work that we need to do to sort of up our game is almost never ending. We could certainly benefit from additional legislative support in a whole host of areas, but we've got to get serious about our role at TEA to provide the support and guidance to the school systems that they deserve, because so many of them are really trying their best. It's a very difficult environment to get right consistently.
Is that legislative support in the form of funding?
I think that's definitely worthy of conversation. You think about how do you increase the capacity of the state to conduct a diagnosis. Well, then you're looking at how many educational diagnosticians do we have? How much do we pay them? How are we recruiting them into the field? How are we training them? Some of that comes down to the sort of resourcing environment that's provided to support that capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Actually, when I visit with educators, they talk about those two things, right? PD and diagnostics, and how there's almost an absence of one and a dearth of others. I think they're encouraged by what they're going to get, but I also think that in terms of resources from us, it's not, they absolutely need money, but just like the conversation about Dallas, we have to make sure the money is well spent. For example, if you get a student in your classroom and you don't get the PD until 8 or 9 weeks afterwards, that's not as effective as getting the training on how to interact with that student, to approach that student, to recognize triggers at the very beginning. So we have to make sure that we fund these things in a way that we spend the money in a smart way so that we're doing right by the student and not just sort of checking the box. But he's absolutely right. Those two things are the things we hear all the time. For example, in San Antonio, which has 17 school districts, there are 3 people shared between those 17 districts that can do an autism diagnosis for the purposes of those schools. Right? So the pipeline issue all the way through is incredibly important, and to the extent that the state has to compete with the private sector, so be it. But we have to allocate the funds to make sure that we can do that.
We've had bills that have been out there. Last session we created a charter a program relative to partnerships with school districts relative to autism and dyslexia, but they were small grants, $1 million apiece for the various school districts. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket of what we should be doing. But I can tell you, I know that commissioners saw this when they got the people that applied for these, the out-of-the-box thinking of how to do this and how to use the resources and money. I would probably say, I think the awards were given out to the majority of people that said, we're going to invest in training, we're going to teach, we're going to, this is what we're going to do, which is, it is so critical to be able to do that. Little things like, last session we had one of our bills that had, it was weighting dyslexia. We've never done that at all. And I know that's one of the discussion items that we came out recommendation-wise, but, just starting with $120 million to start with, to use for training, to get it out there. I think that is going to be so important for us to continue to do that. When school districts, I look at this as a benefit, really, because when school districts don't have the opportunity or they can't deal with a particular child, in the state of Texas right now, you can privately place them. So there is private placement. There is private, people don't really know that very much, but that's what happened. And so when you have a situation where you can't do that, you're privately placing them. Well, those are very expensive placements, and we have to do a better job of being able to take care of the children within the system that we have. And I'm going to give you an example. I was flying on Southwest Airlines the other night. And every once in a while, when you get a real smart aleck flight attendant that's on there, and he says, if we lose cabin pressure, the oxygen max will fall down. Make sure you place yours on your first. If you have a child that's traveling with you, put them on second. If you have more than one child, then put it on the one that has the most potential. And so, we cracked up laughing about it, but that's how I think about how sometimes we think about our children. We're putting resources with the areas, with the kids that need it, that has the most potential to be there. But we should be reversing that, relative to when we talk about our special education population. And interestingly enough, when we think about this on the 504s, because you brought up a good point, say, hey, we're putting them in 504 or something like that. There is some parents sit there and say, I want my child to have services because he's entitled to services under IDEA, but I don't want him being qualified as a special education student because he's not. He just needs maybe some PT or OT, or he needs a little bit of this and that, or she needs this and that to be able to do that. And then I'll add one last thing. One of the ideas and concepts that we came up with last legislative session, and actually statutorily it's in law. I looked it up, so it exists. We actually have the ability right now to provide money to families outside of the classroom for additional services if we so desired. It is in statute. We just haven't funded it for many, many, many years. And you look at that and say, well, why don't we start there? Why don't we start with something that's currently in statute and say, geez, if the parent needs some, depending if you could qualify depending on the need where it's at, but if they need additional OT services or PT services or they need tutoring support or something like that, those are things that we can do statutorily. We just have to make the decision that we want to do that, and that's really what it comes down to.
I want to, before we get off this topic, I want to just reiterate something that Chairman Huberty said. So much of the conversation that we have with both practitioners in the field at large and the public at large in the area of special education, there's a mindset issue that we've got to address directly. Because I think that when you think about special education, everybody has a sort of stereotypical picture in their head about what the student may or may not be capable of, and invariably our stereotypes are not correct. The national data on this is relatively clear. If we provide the right supports for students, something like 80% of the students inside special education can meet or exceed grade level standards. And mind you, only 50% of students generally are meeting grade level standards. This is a statement that bears truth for all Texas students. But in the area of special education, we've got to get serious about understanding if we do not have the right expectations for our kids to begin with, then the rest of the conversation gets very muddled very quickly. And we've got to recognize that our students have extraordinary potential, and it is incumbent upon us to support them the most way effective. And if we do that, we will get phenomenal results and change many, many lives.
I'd love to get people to start lining up for questions. I'm going to go to questions in a little bit. Last question for you guys. What do you think is the main barrier, briefly, to getting school finance reform passed this session?
I know the answer. I think the main barrier is how honest we want to be about it. I think that there is a danger right now that we could use, we being the legislature, that we could use school finance as a Trojan horse for property tax relief. You can literally pour billions of dollars into public education, provide some sort of property tax relief, but the experience of the schools aren't that different. And I think that depending on how aggressive and astute and vigilant we are in the next month and a half or so, will determine whether or not we go down that path or whether we cut that off and we focus on taking care of our kids. And if we can take care of our kids, then there might be some property tax relief in there for everybody else. But you can't start a school finance conversation with property tax relief. You have to start a school finance conversation with students and teachers and campuses and parents, and then property tax relief can come. That I think is going to be the biggest barrier, is what the true priority is, despite the banner.
I think the number was 133 to 17. That was a number of members in the House of Representatives that voted for school finance reform last legislative session. I expect the number to be 150 to 0 this time, if anybody's paid attention to this last election cycle and what's important to people as we go forward. Look, Speaker Bonin has said it's happening. That's one thing that he said is going to happen under his leadership, and I've met with him, and I believe it. He was there when last session supporting us all the way as chairman of the Ways and Means, and he fought for us and for the House, which is one of the reasons he's going to, the people trust him that he will be our speaker. And on the floor, too. He was there helping me as we needed it, as long as with Diego, and fighting about that. The difference is that it's going to be policy. We're going to have different ideas and policies that people want. And so part of the job of whoever becomes the chairman of that committee, and on the Senate side as well, because there's no certainty of who's going to be in charge of what, is that you have to listen. You have to listen to people, then you have to gather information, then you have to put a product out that is capable of being passed. Not overreaching, but not underreaching at the same time. And the governor has said that it's important. He wants this done. The lieutenant governor has said it's important. He wants it done. The speaker said he wants it and expects to get that done. So you know, we need to get sworn in and we need to get to work. Because I believe there's nothing that can stop us at this particular time from getting it done. And you know, you can call, you know, if we can't get it done, you know, I think we get it done the regular. But you know, if we got to be here until we get it done, then I'm prepared to do that. I think it's critical for us to get that done. This is the time. This is the expectation. People aren't, you know, we cannot fail the citizens and most importantly the children, the 5.4 million children in our system.
You're already prepared for a special session.
I'm always prepared for a special session. I've been through like 7 of them, so, you know, I mean, it is what it is, you know. I hope not, but, you know, there's always something. Who knows? You know, I mean, you'd never rule it out. Don't make plans in July. That's all, you know. So.
Let's go to questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. Wondering what your reactions are to the move by the land commissioner to move the $600 million directly from the school land, the school land fund to the State Board of Education.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One of you.
I feel like I'm in the middle. I mean, you may feel differently. I feel like I'm in the middle of a bizarre turf war. I feel like everyone's trying to declare to the world that they're relevant and that they have a role in this issue, especially considering how popular it is. I think it's strange that the way that the GLO and the State Board of Education interact, just like I did with the Dallas issue. Instead of trying to make sense of it, I kind of want someone to explain to me why it's better to do it this way as opposed to a different way.
You know, look, it's pretty simple. There is a huge contest between SBOE and the land office. They sent $600 million to the ASF. They could have sent it to the PSF. The bottom line is that, and there's this argument of, well, we're not getting all the money that we got last term, and they're right. They sent more money. They, you know, statutorily they are limited to send $600 million. That's all they can. That's all they can send. And there has been an argument about whose investment policy is better. Is it the state land boards, meaning the GLO's office, or is it the State Board of Education? They did send another $55 million this past week back over to them, and I know that the State Board of Education put in another 110 or something along those lines. And I will remind people that the Commissioner Bush did send more money back to the legislature in April of last year. I think that people need to not be concerned necessarily about that. There's been this political debate being started, which is going to be settled when we have the finance chairs and the appropriators sit down and start talking about it, is my view of the world. While, you know, he has every right to do what he wants to do, and he runs that office and he's duly elected, we'll sit down and have conversations as we go forward. But the one thing he did say was that he could send more money, but he's limited statutorily because their fund has done so much better. So that's a revenue source, meaning that's a way for us to find some revenue. I think could be exciting, you know, if we were able to lift the cap on what statutorily can send. So to be determined, not over. We'll continue to have those discussions as we go forward. Mike, I don't know if you want to get in the middle of that.
I am the secretary for the State Board of Education, so I do what they tell me.
Hello, thank you everyone for being here. I'm a former educator at a Title I school in South Dallas, and one of the main questions I have is what can be done about teachers' salaries, because I know really incredible people who are teachers that are 10, 20-year veterans as teachers that are having to drive Uber in the summers to make ends meet. And, you know, I think that should not happen, basically. You know, 20-year teachers that don't have homes yet have to live in apartments. So what can be done about this issue?
You know, it's the big debate that we've had for years and years. And look, we had our school finance commission, and I think consensus-wise, relative to not only the outcomes but the expenditures, is that we want to pay more. And so in the proposal that we put out, there's $100 million in the first year for additional incentive pay, teacher pay that's going to go in. That could grow to $1 billion, right? Within 10 years. It could be less than that, depending on how we establish that. We're going to work with the school districts. We're going to work with the superintendents. We're going to work with the teachers to create a program. What Diego said earlier, he was right, which is that we have the grading system, or however you want to frame that, which is the incentive part of it, to say how good is this teacher. And I think what will happen is it'll drive people back into the teaching ranks, because our goal is very simple. If I have the best possible teacher, the only way that you, and I know that I'm being repetitive, the only way that you make more money is you go in administration. Well, why don't we find a way to get more teachers to stay in the classroom? And so that's what we're doing. This is the first time that we are, they've done it before, they've done the incentive things before, but the reality of the situation is that we haven't been collaborative enough to be able to do that. And so our hope is that we can really focus on that. We had a teacher quality subcommittee as part of the Public Education Committee last session. I think it's important to have something similar to that, but maybe focus on the compensation programs and surround that with the quality of the teachers, because absent of having good quality and high-paid teachers, we're never going to make this a success. We can talk about all the money we want to spend in the world, but if we don't do that, we're not going to be successful. I'm convinced of that. So we're working on it, and I know everybody said, "Oh, you're working on it." We really are. I mean, the people that have focused on this have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours trying to fix this problem, and I believe we're going to. I don't know if you have an opinion of that, but
No, I mean, I think that prior to the conversation, this is one of the cans that we always say we kick the can down the road. That's what happened. I also think that both as a society and a legislature, honestly, there's a certain expectation of martyrdom by teachers, right? I think that there are a lot of teachers that qualify themselves for free and reduced lunch, and so it's one of those things that we just can't allow to continue. I think it's safe to say that the two of us are two people in the legislature who don't always get our way when it comes to the way that money is spent. We're hoping that the message from the last election, not the partisan message, but the priority message, adds some wind to those sails.
We have time for one last question.
I look at education as a three-legged stool. You've got teachers and children and parents all working together as a team to be successful. And I've heard a lot of discussion today about teachers and children, but less about parents. So I'm wondering what policymakers can do to facilitate parental engagement and to make sure that they're involved in education. I think that's an important component that we need to be aware of and work to make sure that is there and solid.
All right. I don't know if I have a good answer, and I think that parental involvement is a hard thing to legislate, and I also think that, especially in a lot of communities like the one I represent, which is the urban core of San Antonio, that you can control the teacher part, the students are a captive audience, and you hope that the parents participate, and you try to get the local administration to engage them. However, I have seen when you reduce teacher turnover, when you reduce principal leadership turnover, and some districts like Northeast ISD invest in people who focus on all the non-academic things that affect academics, and they're called family specialists. So the elementary school that I went to, Almost Elementary in Northeast, is surrounded by the highest concentration of Section 8 houses in the entire city. They have an amazing family specialist there. And when you go to their PTA meetings, when you go to their field day, when you go to their Christmas programs, it's packed because they have invested in creating that relationship. So I don't know if the legislation is to mandate or legislate parental involvement as much as it is to invest in people who make it a priority to create that relationship, because that benefits the students tremendously.
I think there's a variety of both policies and initiatives that can help orient our school systems to properly empower and support parents. So, the simple act of actually deciding which school your child attends is, in fact, a fairly empowering activity and creates a degree of buy-in. So, facilitating that parental choice, I think, is something that's worthy, and many school systems around the state engage in that kind of practice, but not necessarily all. But the other thing is I'll reflect on a conversation I had with really a kind of a hero of mine. So in Harlem, there's a guy named Jeffrey Canada who, over a number of years, did basically everything imaginable to improve both students and families. And he actually created basically parent university, a baby college kind of thing, where he facilitates supports and trains low-income, at-risk parents on what many of us would just think about as sort of middle-class values. And I talked to him, and he said, when we think about how we reach out to our parents, even before their kids come into our system, I kind of put them into, like 4 buckets. One, the parents that don't, they're fine. They're the Huxtables or the Ozzie and Harriets. They know everything they need to know. We don't have to worry about them. Another is a group that you provide a little bit of training to, a little bit of support for, and then you never actually have to worry about their kids ever again. They just didn't necessarily know. They didn't have experience with our school systems. Didn't have experience with sort of upward mobility. And then there's a sort of another group. As I was talking to him, and he says, they want to do everything that you can, but sometimes the stresses of life is, just keeping a roof over the kid's head. It's just difficult. So they're somewhat inconsistent. So that training helps and empowers, but it doesn't necessarily. You don't see the same kind of translation into this for the students. And then there's another group of parents that are basically AWOL. I mean, they could be incarcerated. They could have substance abuse problems. And he said, it doesn't mean that you don't want to try to empower your parents. You don't want to try to invest in supporting your parents. You don't want to try to orient the system to make it welcoming to parents and just throw up your hands. You do what you can, because everything that you do then to support the parent as a child's first teacher is one less thing you have to worry about for the next 13 years in terms of the public sector investment that we would otherwise have to make. So it's to me, it's just sort of a good sense for us to make the kinds of sort of initiative and programmatic supports for families that we know sort of empowers them as a child's first teacher.
And I know quickly, because we're about done, but I'd say two things. Number one is that we've had this issue, and I really meant it. Some parents just kick them out and say, send them back at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and maybe they care or they don't care. You can't legislate making a parent care about their kid and about the parent's life. You just can't. I mean, we found that. But what you can do is what Commissioner Morath said, which is that create the opportunity to bring them in, engage them, invite them into classrooms, things of that nature. And the one thing we recognized, certainly I think we did last session, and I know we've done this, is that the expectations and the struggles that we put on the kids itself and the school districts is falling short related to social workers and counselors. We're about 50% of where we need to be with counselors. And if we can get more counselors in the classroom and more social workers that can reach out to those parents, understand what that child is going through, understand what's happening at home. Is the parent incarcerated? Are they homeless? Where does that child live? Are they living with grandma and grandpa not involved in the child's life? So we can understand what that child's doing, so then we can engage, whether it's the parent or the guardian or whoever it is, to help that child. That's what's going to make a difference. But right now, counselors don't have time to do that. They don't have time to deal with those children. They don't have time and all the opportunity to do that. We have studied it. We are at 50% of what we need for counselors. 50% in the state of Texas. And when you look at that and you think about the thousands of counselors that are needed, it's about a $400 million price tag is what we've determined that to be. And so that's another issue that we're going to focus on. So that's one aspect from a legislative perspective that we can do to be able to help with that.
Great. I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you. This is the end, actually, of our symposium today. Thanks so much to you guys for coming, and thank you to our sponsors for supporting this event.